Good morning to all of you. Here we are again with David Hume. If you remember, we stopped last time on page 200. We dealt with the importance in the judgment of taste of time, place, situation, disposition, serenity of mind, recollection of thought, and attention to the object. Now we move on. We read the next paragraph. The same Homer, who pleased at Athens and Rome 2,000 years ago, is still admired at Paris and at London. This is, of course, again, a way to say that there has to be some kind of standard of taste, right? So all the changes of climate, government, religion, and language have not been able to obscure his glory. Authority or prejudice may give a temporary vogue, fame if you like, to a bad poet or orator, but his reputation will never be durable or general. So notice how, for Hume, one of the things that tells us that something is a work of art is if it has withstood the test of time. I continue. When his compositions are examined, this bad poet, bad orator, or bad artist of any kind, when his compositions are examined by those who follow him, posterity, or by foreigners from another country, the enchantment is dissipated and his faults appear in their true colors. On the contrary, a real genius, the longer his works endure, and the more wide they are spread, the more sincere is the admiration which he meets with. Envy and jealousy have too much place in a narrow circle, and even familiar acquaintance with his person may diminish the applause due to his performances. But when these obstructions are removed, the beauties which are naturally fitted to excite agreeable sentiments immediately display their energy, and while the world endures, they maintain their authority over the minds of men. So, Hume is saying, of course, the true work of art endures. Don't go for a good judgment to the people who are close to the person, because then other things enter into the equation, and jealousy, envy, but also other things. Could be positive things. Anything that enters into the judgment of the person that's too close to him, we leave it out. Let's look at more generally, universally, if you like, even though I avoid the word universal with you. More generally, how the person is judged as an artist over space and close to him, but far from him, especially, and time. And here's what he induces from this, 200. Still, next paragraph. Hume says, it appears then that among, if you like, all the variety and caprice of taste, of course, the whole notion that each one has his taste, true, but despite the fact that each one has his taste, there are certain general principles of approbation or blame, whose influence a careful eye may trace in all operations of the mind. Some particular forms or qualities from the general structure of the internal fabric are calculated to please and others to displease. If they fail of their effect in any particular instance, it is from some apparent defect or imperfection in the organ. A man in a fever would not insist on his palate as able to decide concerning flavors, nor would one affected with the jaundice pretend to give a verdict with regard to colors. In each creature there is a sound and a defective state, and the former alone, so of course the sound state, can be supposed to afford us a true standard of taste and sentiment. If in the sound state of the organ there be an entire or a considerable uniformity of sentiment among men, we may thence derive an idea of the perfect beauty. In like manner as the appearance of objects in daylight to the eye of a man in health is denominated their true and real colour, even while colour is allowed to be merely a phantasm of the senses. So, there is a question, of course, of judgment, Hume is telling us, and we have to remember that Hume is the quintessential empiricist. He will always go to the senses and to impressions to search for any truth. So, of course, if I'm an empiricist, if Hume then is an empiricist, since Hume is an empiricist, he has to go to the senses. But my senses can fail when I am very simply not in a good state. Remember what we said last time? You have to have a good disposition, a serenity of mind, right? To be able to pay attention, close attention to the object. All of these, if you have some organ in you that's not functioning well, let's say your tongue, let's say your eye, especially in regards to things you see, colors and so on, your ears for the music, so on. If these are not working properly, of course your judgment has to be put aside for the time being. Now, for any, Hume is saying here, sound men who are healthy generally, and of course who are in the right time, place, situation, disposition, serenity of mind, a recollection of thought, and so on. If they are sound, healthy, then there is among them a kind of general judgment. There are principles that they follow in their judgment. So what we retain from this paragraph, if you like, is its beginning. It appears then that despite all the variety and caprice of taste, there are certain general principles of approbation or blame, as also history has proven to us. No one will look, in other words, at something like a Michelangelo and say this is not art, or this is not beautiful. All right. We continue. Many and frequent are the defects in the internal organs which prevent or weaken the influence of those general principles on which depends our sentiment of beauty or ugliness, deformity. Though some objects by the structure of the mind be naturally calculated to give pleasure, it is not to be expected that in every individual the pleasure will be equally felt, because we all have different things happening in us. Particular incidents and situations occur which either throw false light on the objects or are an obstacle to, or hinder, the true from conveying to the imagination the proper sentiment and perception. Okay. Now, one of the reasons someone may not be able to judge well is the next paragraph. One obvious cause why many feel not the proper sentiment of beauty is the lack, want here is lack, of that, okay, here's the term, the key term here, that's going to be the key term for a few paragraphs, delicacy, okay, is the want, the lack of that delicacy of imagination, which is requisite to convey its sensibility of those finer emotions. This delicacy, everyone pretends to, everyone talks of it, and would reduce every kind of taste or sentiment to its standard. But as our intention in this essay is to mingle some light of the understanding with the feelings of sentiment, it will be proper to give a more accurate definition of delicacy than hitherto been attempted, until now, hitherto. And not to draw our philosophy from too profound a source, we shall have recourse to a noted story in Don Quixote. Okay, so first thing then we are dealing with here is the notion of delicacy. So anyone who wants to be able to judge a work of art has to have delicacy. What is this delicacy? Everyone seems to agree. Hume tells us about this. I remind you, giving here the standard of taste, right? So this would be one of the general principles of taste, is the possession of delicacy, a principle, if you like, of delicacy. What is it? It is with good reason, I read. Okay, the reference, before I read, for those of you who don't know, Hume is taking an example from the very famous book, the very famous novel, if you like. It's the beginning of what we will call later novel, the work that is probably one of my favorite books I've ever read, Don Quixote. It's the story of this knight who travels looking for love, and it's all full of crazy stuff. The most famous scene is where he fights with windmills. He lives in the past, he lives in the stories of heroes and knights, and of course none of this existed anymore. So he lives in a fantasy world. It is, I'm sure you've seen a lot of references to Don Quixote. He's very thin, very fine guy, followed with his assistant Sancho. And they are both very funny in many instances, of course. And it's a whole critique of a genre of chivalry. Anyways, it's one of the most enduring works of literature in the history of mankind. And really, do not live this life without having read Cervantes, this is the writer, of course, Cervantes' Don Quixote. Never. There are many films also made, I think, at least a couple from Don Quixote. And also the very beautiful musical by Jacques Brel, Don Quixote de la Mancha. Very, very beautiful also. So I advise you to see that, and particularly listen to Jacques Brel's song La Quête, the quest, like this, the knight's quest. Anyways, I'm deviating too much, but I recommend reading this, and I think Hume's choice is definitely here for reference, an excellent, excellent choice. So let's see. This is all to say what delicacy is all about. He's getting to this from a story in Don Quixote, the novel, if we can call it novel again. It is with good reason, I read, says Sancho. Sancho is the assistant, as I said to you, of Don Quixote, his follower, his disciple. He's always with him. It is with good reason, says Sancho to the squire with the great nose, that I pretend to have a judgment in wine. I know about wine. This is a quality hereditary in our family. Two of my kinsmen from my family were once called, my extended family, were once called to give their opinion of a hogshead, which was supposed to be excellent, being old and of a good vintage, a wine. One of them tastes it, considers it, and after mature reflection pronounces the wine to be good, were it not for a small taste of leather which he perceived in it. The other, after using the same precautions, gives also his verdict in favor of the wine, but with the reserve of a taste of iron, which he could easily distinguish. You cannot imagine how much they were both ridiculed for their judgment. But who laughed in the end? On emptying the hogshead, there was found at the bottom an old key with a leathern thong tied to it. Okay. This is a very nice story, which I also remember reading in Don Quixote. So let's remember what this is. This is to illustrate what delicacy is. So we have two experts in wine. So these experts, before a hogshead, by the way, is a barrel of wine. They taste the wine. Now, someone without their delicacy, because these two have delicacy, would say this is a good wine, it's a good vintage, a good year. A good year, and it's old, well aged, and it's good. But one says, however, there's just a strange taste of leather, and the other says of iron. Why are they able to say that? They are the only ones who could say it. Because they have this delicacy. They have, in other words, this finer feeling about something that the rest didn't have. Okay? So those, of course, who didn't have it ridiculed them, made fun of them. What are you talking about? They said. We can't taste iron in this. Why would there be iron and wine? It's impossible. Okay. So, of course, when the hogshead was finished, the barrel was finished, they realized that they were right. There was a key at the bottom and in a leather thong. So they were right. So they have delicacy, and only because they have this delicacy, this very fine way of judging things, that they managed to know something others cannot know. I continue to see how, of course, Hume comments on this. He says the great resemblance between mental and bodily taste will easily teach us to apply this story. Though it be certain that beauty and ugliness, deformity, more than sweet and bitter, are not qualities and objects, but belong entirely to the sentiment, internal or external, it must be allowed that there are certain qualities and objects which are fitted by nature to produce those particular feelings. Now, as these qualities may be found in a small degree, or may be mixed and confounded with each other, it often happens that the taste is not affected with such minute qualities, or is not able to distinguish all the particular flavors amidst the disorder in which they are presented. Where the organs are so fine as to allow nothing to escape them, and at the same time so exact as to perceive every ingredient in the composition, this we call delicacy of taste. Whether we employ these terms in the literal or metaphorical sense, here then the general rules of beauty are of use. Being drawn from the established models and from the observation of what pleases or displeases when presented singly and in a high degree. And if the same qualities in a continued composition and in a smaller degree affect not the organs with a sensible delight or uneasiness, we exclude the person from all the pretensions to this delicacy. To produce these general rules or avowed patterns of composition is like finding the key with a leathern thong, which justified the verdict of Sancho's kinsman and confounded those pretended judges who had condemned them. Though the hogshead had never been emptied, the taste of the one was still equally delicate, and that of the other equally dull and languid. But it would have been more difficult to have proved the superiority of the former to the conviction of every bystander. In like manner, though the beauties of writing had never been methodized or reduced to general principles, though no excellent models had ever been acknowledged, let's suppose that, in other words, still, if that was the case, the different degrees of taste would still have subsisted, and the judgment of one man been preferable to that of another. But it would not have been so easy to silence the bad critic, who might always insist upon his particular sentiment and refuse to submit to his antagonist. What a fine thinker Hume is. But when we show him an avowed principle of art, when we illustrate this principle by examples whose operation from his own particular taste he acknowledges to be conformable to the principle, when we prove that the same principle may be applied to the present case where he did not perceive or feel its influence, he must conclude, upon the whole, that the fault lies in himself, and that he wants the delicacy, which is requisite to make him sensible of every beauty and every blemish in any composition or discourse. Okay. We have then here one of these principles, right? The principle of delicacy determines what an object is, a work of art, beautiful or not work of art, or an ugly work. What is delicacy? Hume here defines it for us. when the organs are so fine as to allow nothing to escape them, and at the same time so exact. They are fine, they can go into every particular, and they are exact so as to perceive every ingredient in the composition. This we call delicacy of taste. Of course, this is something we know that you have to be also trained to get. You have to work a lot on it. You don't simply become a person with great delicacy in their taste. You have to work, you have to judge, you have to read, you have to examine, you have to observe. You don't suddenly become someone with a delicate taste. If today I take some work by Picasso to someone who has never seen Cubist paintings before and say, look how wonderful this work is, because I was able to study it very well. I have experience of how, if you like, this developed Cubism, let's say from the works of someone like Cézanne, who was leading slowly towards that. If I retrace the whole history of art, I find what Cubism is doing. Then I can find and look at the specific details in it. I observe very well with my eye. And nothing then escapes me. I know why he's doing what he's doing. I know why he's drawing this line in this specific way. I know where Picasso got his training from drawing. Okay? And then, because of this, there is delicacy in my organs. My organs are fine and exact. And when someone else comes who has never seen this, who has lived, I don't know, in some village, remote village, he comes and looks at this and says, this is ugly, what the hell is this? This is horrible. I can sit with him and show him slowly, little by little, what he's missing. And at the end, after much work, especially with something like Cubism, after, let's say, 5 years of work, it could be 2 days or it could be 5 years, they will come to realize that in fact they were in error. And this is a work of art, a beautiful work of art. All right, we move on. It is acknowledged to be the perfection of every sense or faculty, says Hume, to perceive with exactness its most minute objects and allow nothing to escape its notice and observation. The smaller the objects are, which become sensible to the eye, the finer is that organ, and the more elaborate is its make and composition. I have to train, then, my eye. A good palate is not tried by strong flavors, but by a mixture of small ingredients, where we are still sensible of each part, despite, notwithstanding, its minuteness, smallness, and its confusion with the rest. In like manner, a quick and acute perception of beauty and deformity must be the perfection of our mental taste. Nor can a man be satisfied with himself while he suspects that any excellence or blemish in a discourse has passed him unobserved. In this case, the perfection of the man and the perfection of the sense or feeling are found to be united. A very delicate palate on many occasions may be a great inconvenience both to a man himself and to his friends. But a delicate taste of wit, how you use your language intelligently, wit or beauty must always be a desirable quality, because it is the source of all the finest and most innocent enjoyments of which human nature is susceptible. In this decision, the sentiments of all mankind are agreed. Where you can ascertain a delicacy of taste, it is sure to meet with approbation. And the best way of ascertaining it is to appeal to those models and principles which have been established by the uniform consent and experience of nation and ages. We understand all of this now. Another principle after delicacy is in the following paragraph. Practice. But though there be naturally, I read, a wide difference in point of delicacy between one person and another, each one can be more delicate, less delicate, differently delicate than another, nothing tends further to increase and improve this talent than practice. Okay? Like I said, in a particular art, and the frequent survey or contemplation of a particular species of beauty. When objects of any kind are first presented to the eye or imagination, the sentiment which attends them is obscure and confused, and the mind is in a great measure incapable of pronouncing concerning their merits or defects, as a painting by Picasso, for example. The taste cannot perceive the several excellencies of the performance, much less distinguish the particular character of each excellency and ascertain its quality and degree. If it pronounces the whole in general to be beautiful or deformed, it is the utmost that can be expected, and even this judgment a person so unpracticed will be apt to deliver with great hesitation and reserve. But allow him to acquire experience in those objects. His feeling becomes more exact and nice, fine, in this sense. Fine. He not only perceives then the beauties and defects of each part, but marks the distinguishing species of each quality and assigns it suitable praise or blame. A clear and distinct sentiment attends him through the whole survey of the objects. It should be through the whole survey of the objects. And he discerns that very degree and kind of approbation or displeasure which each part is necessarily fitted to produce. The mist dissipates, which seemed formerly to hang over the object, and the organ acquires greater perfection in its operations. Enough for this paragraph. So, in addition to having delicacy, the organ has to be practiced. We need practice. We have to have experience in judging objects and to judge each and every little part of them in a finer way. I go to the next paragraph. So advantageous is practice to the discernment of beauty that before we can give judgment on any work of importance, it will even be requisite that that very individual performance be more than once perused by us, looked at by us, and be surveyed in different lights with attention and deliberation. There is a flutter or hurry of thought which attends the first perusal of any piece, and which confounds the genuine sentiment of beauty. The relation of the parts is not discerned. The true characters of style are little distinguished. The several perfections and defects seem wrapped up in a species of confusion and present themselves indistinctly to the imagination. Not to mention that there is a species of beauty which, as it is florid and superficial, pleases at first, but being found incompatible with a just expression either of reason or passion, soon palls upon the taste and is then rejected with disdain, at least rated at a much lower value. Interesting too. So we need, for Hume, practice. It is only when you have good practice that you start to see, please note, the relation of the parts. So in any kind of judgment of taste, any kind of judgment based on principles of taste, standards then of taste, we have to be able to discern the true relation of the parts. And this is done only for a practiced person. Okay? Moreover, Hume warns us, some things may actually appear to be very nice at the beginning, and then when your taste is improved, when you have finer judgment, when you have a delicacy, when you have practice, you realize, as you look at them again, that what seemed at first to be very nice is in fact not so at all. But this is only to the practiced eye, to the practiced ear. A practiced ear is not an ear that just takes things immediately at face value. If before I found, for example, the songs, some popular songs, let's say Madonna, great works of art, when my ear is trained and I have then delicacy through practice, I start to listen to jazz, and then I start to listen to free jazz. Then I can pass a judgment on Madonna's song and say, this is simple, very simplistic, and rather for the most part bad music. This is what Hume means by delicacy under practice. And we move to another principle. Comparisons are important. It is impossible to continue in the practice of contemplating any order of beauty without being frequently obliged to form comparisons between the several species and degrees of excellence and estimating their proportion to each other. A man who has had no opportunity of comparing the different kinds of beauty is indeed totally unqualified to pronounce an opinion with regard to any object presented to him. Think of what I said about Picasso. By comparison alone, we fix the epithets of praise or blame and learn how to assign the due degree of each. The coarsest daubing contains a certain lustre of colors and exactness of imitation, which are so far beauties and would affect the mind of a peasant or Indian with the highest admiration. The most vulgar ballads are not entirely destitute of harmony or nature, and none but a person familiarized to superior beauties would pronounce their numbers harsh or narration uninteresting. Think of what I said about Madonna. A great inferiority of beauty gives pain to a person conversant in the highest excellence of the kind, and is for that reason pronounced a deformity. As the most finished object with which we are acquainted is naturally supposed to have reached the pinnacle of perfection and to be entitled to the highest applause, one accustomed to see and examine and weigh the several performances admired in different ages and nations can alone rate the merits of a work exhibited to his view and assign its proper rank among the productions of genius. So the other principle involved here is that of comparison. Of course, that means practice behind it. It means, of course, delicacy behind it. It means that we have practiced the use of our organs to have a delicate taste. Okay? And then we are comparing. Actually, this is part and parcel of it. It's not you do one after the other, of course. You do all this together. How would my example of Picasso work if I didn't compare him to Cézanne, if I didn't compare him to others, if I didn't compare him even to what is later, if I didn't compare him, let's say, to the Surrealist school, if I didn't compare him to how Cézanne uses color, if I didn't compare him to how Cézanne wants to confound all perspectives together, put many perspectives, and so go beyond perspectivism. If I don't do all that, and I don't compare works, I will never develop a very good taste. If I do not practice and develop my taste, I will not go from Madonna to something higher, then I will never be able to say that Madonna's music is just simple music. It doesn't mean it's all bad. Hume tells us, we realize then that in Madonna there is certain harmony. I mean, we're working with rhythm, we are working with a certain melody. We know that, but at very basic levels. But I don't know it's at a basic level if I don't have training and if I don't compare. I can only start to compare very well when I'm discovering jazz and I'm discovering different figures of jazz. I'm discovering different figures of free jazz, and I compare to classical music. All these comparisons allow me to pronounce something correctly as a true judgment of taste on the work of someone like Madonna. And then I won't say it's just rubbish, but I can say it doesn't equal the work of Ornette Coleman, for example, the free jazzman. Of course not. But this is a result of a delicacy developed through practice and of comparisons between works. I reread again what he says. By comparison alone, we fix the epithets of praise and blame and learn how to assign the due degree of each. How much is it to praise a song? How much is it to blame? How much is it not good? Where is it functioning well? Where is it just simplistic, perhaps? Okay. So, we will move on afterwards to the question of prejudice. Then we will deal with good sense and some other difficulties. I will leave this for next Thursday for you. No homework then. I will ask you to do something perhaps at the end of Hume. I'm not sure, I might ask you before because we will have some holiday. I will tell you something. The Easter holiday has changed. I received a letter from the president to all teachers. No? The teaching will stop from the 10th of April to the 13th of April. Okay, so that means no teaching from this Friday to this Monday. In other words, we are not affected. We are going to have class next Tuesday and next Thursday. Okay, this has changed then. And then the university is closed again from the 17th to the 20th, and again we are not affected because it's Friday to Monday. Now, that means that we have a lot more sessions than we were meant to have. So we can take our time, I think, especially with this beautiful text by Hume. We will do it, gradually finish it. We have, in other words, 4 extra classes for all I can see, since there's no holidays for you. They are just weekends, actually. So only classes that are Monday and Friday will have off. So not you. So I announced this to you. You have then holidays from the 10th to the 13th and 17th to the 20th. So your classes online that are meant to be Friday and Monday will be off. The others that are like mine, Tuesday and Thursday, will continue. So we have class this Thursday and we continue next Tuesday. So actually, I'll wait till the end of Hume to ask you a question. And then after we do Kant, I'm going to ask you to compare Kant and Hume too. But this will come later. And then we'll have time to do the other 2 texts, in particular Dickey, I believe, and Danto. I wish you all good luck in everything. Stay safe, and we'll speak again on Thursday.